Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the Tottenham Way podcast. I am Marcus Buckland in the company tonight of Tom Allnutt of The Times, and we're digesting the draw for the league phase of the Champions League, which was made a couple of hours ago. And you've got to say, on the certainly on the first lookings of it, it's pretty good from a Tottenham point of view. So we'll assess that. We've got a few more days of the transfer window. I've got to say, I can't wait for this transfer window to close. You sit there like a sad so-and-so reading all these reports. Oh, he's coming. He's probably going to get left out of his side on Saturday so they can get the deal done. And then, of course, it doesn't get done. And suddenly Chelsea are appearing on the horizon and all the rest of it. So a few names that we can assess. Bournemouth on Saturday, Spurs looking for a third successive win. Bournemouth have been, well, not great so far this season. Losing at Liverpool, played pretty well. They beat Wolves, but obviously Wolves have been poor. And then Bournemouth actually lost at home in the League Cup a couple of nights ago as well. So Tottenham will certainly, I think, fancy their chances of making it 3 wins out of 3 before the international break. Tom is busy typing away, looking at this list of teams that are going to face Spurs in the Champions League. If you haven't heard or you just need confirmation, we've got Dortmund, we've got PSG, and we would like a little bit of revenge, of course, after the Super Cup match a couple of weeks ago. We've got Villarreal, we've got Eintracht Frankfurt, who we played in the quarterfinals of the Europa League last season. We've got Slavia Prague, we've got Bodø Glimt, who we played in the semi-finals of the Europa League last season. We've got Copenhagen, who, like Bodø, have qualified for the league phase and are very, very good defensively. They only conceded 1 goal in qualifying. And Monaco are the other team. We go away to Monaco, who have, amongst others, Eric Dier in their ranks, of course. Tom, I mean, I think the way that the draw works means you're not ever going to get a truly horrendous lineup because you can't play any of the other English teams and you only get 2 sides from pot 1. But having said all that, I think it's really a very good draw for Spurs. Would you concur with that analysis?
Hi, Marcus. Thanks for having me. For those watching on video, I should probably explain the kind of flowery pink floral wallpaper behind me. I'm at my in-laws, so I'm upstairs in a bedroom. So hopefully the sound in the video is okay. But I don't apologise for the background. I think it's very nice. But
it's all right. I mean, to be honest, the curtain blinds behind me are probably not great when it comes to fashion. So hopefully the content of the conversation is going to prove better than the background.
We need to sort of work on our backgrounds. So we need to kind of get the books and the football shirts, and we're not quite there yet, are we? With our sort of our traditional podcast backgrounds.
We're beginners, Tom. We'll learn. By October, we're gonna look every bit as good as we sound. I hope.
Yeah. The Champions League draw. I think it's a good draw for Spurs, isn't it? It's I agree with you. The format sort of means that you can never have a nightmare draw, I don't think, anymore. You always get the spread of the teams across those sort of 8 games, means that you're always going to get 3 or 4 at least that you think are winnable. Whereas I guess in the old format with the 4, there was always that possible of a sort of a group of death, where even in pot 4, you could get someone who didn't quite deserve to be there, a sort of a sleeping giant, if you like. I don't know, a Juventus or someone who had sort of underperformed the previous season happened to be in pot 4. That doesn't really happen anymore. I think, without getting into it in too much detail, I think by design, effectively UEFA are, obviously trying to create a format where the biggest teams have, lots of trapdoors where they can, is that the right word? I don't know, lots of escape routes anyway, where if they make mistakes, they can basically get out of it. So that I think for everyone, I think you're right. There are routes basically to points. And I think, if you look at the table from last season, the top 8, I think you sort of needed about 5 wins basically to get into that top 8 from the 8 games. So if you look at those games, I think Spurs could get 5 wins. 4 wins, I remember, you just missed out. There were some teams who actually got 5 wins and lost 3 who didn't get through as well. But I think 5 wins, and if you draw 1 or so, then you've got a good chance getting into the top 8. In terms of the top, 16 for the playoff round, you really only need 3 wins out of the 8 to sort of get you actually into that kind of the playoff round for the knockout. So I mean, if you're looking at those 8 games, we're thinking, okay, minimum 3, 5 would get you there. I think Spurs should be looking to beat Copenhagen, Slavia Prague, Frankfurt, they could probably beat as well, though it's difficult as away. Bodø, I think they can beat. They know they got the better of them in last year in the Europa League. And to be honest, I felt over the two-leg Spurs were significantly superior in that match, more so even than the Frankfurt game. Particularly, the away leg was really controlled, but at home, I felt like Spurs, we were all, if you remember, we were all sort of saying they should have won the match 3 or 4-0 maybe and put the tie to bed, So I think there are wins there for Spurs. Of course, the difficult ones, PSG, will be almost like a kind of a free hit. Equally, they've just played in the Super Cup final. They can take confidence. I guess Thomas Frank might wonder if his kind of special PSG operation has been sort of used up, has he kind of played that one a bit early? But that's obviously, a great tie anyway. I think that's kind of what you're in the Champions League for, right? Those kind of nights. Villarreal will be interesting. I think at home, they can expect to win now. Villarreal finished 5th last season in La Liga. Good team, organised. In a way, it's kind of a shame it's at home. I think, an away tie Villarreal will be really interesting. But yeah, I think, you look at it, only PSG really, the other team you'd say Spurs would go into it and feel like they are the real obvious underdog. I think in all the other ties, I don't know what you think, Marcus, I think they're winnable games.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one point to note is that it's not necessarily that important to start the Champions League campaign strongly, and PSG are a prime example of that because they were really struggling in the league phase last season. They scraped through into the playoffs, and of course they went from strength to strength. So, the pressure's on. Of course it's on because we're at Europe's top table. I think the other problem, though, is just looking at the potential fixture pile-up, because around some of those European weeks, there are some really tough league games as well. I won't go into all the details, but I think there's one period in November in particular where we play the likes of Chelsea, Manchester United and Arsenal. There's a European game thrown in there as well. I think there's going to be a similar situation at the start of January, which is why the squad depth is going to be so important. Because, it's not vital to win every single game, but the quicker you can sort out your position in that league phase, the better, because then if necessary, maybe you can just rotate your players a little bit. And we shouldn't forget the League Cup. I'm really excited about the League Cup. I always am. And last year, of course, we got to the semi-finals. We all know what happened against Liverpool. But just watching Manchester United go out last night, and I'm thinking, oh, goodness me. By the way, well, we're not a Manchester United podcast, but that was quite extraordinary. But I really feel extraordinary game. And again, it slightly reminded me, and I've been criticised already for having a go at Ange, but it reminded me a couple of years ago of Spurs not playing their strongest starting 11 at Fulham when we didn't have European football and we went out of the competition. I just do not understand why. Well, there's a lot of things I don't understand about Ruben Amorim in Manchester United, but why on earth he didn't start with his strongest team? These managers don't learn. When they haven't got Europe as well, they have just invited disaster upon themselves. And
it wasn't a pretty strong team, to be fair. I looked at it on my app and sort of thought I was expecting it to be weaker than it was. It wasn't the kind of team where you could say, well, we played a load of kids and that's why we lost. They played, I'd say, at least half of that side was a decent United side.
Yeah, but I'd still be starting with Fernandes. I'd have Mbeumo. There were a couple of others. I think you want to start with them. But the bottom line for Tottenham, we've actually got a good draw there in Doncaster. We're going to have so many games, I'd like to think, this season, which is why the league phase of the Champions League is fascinating. Obviously the next.
I agree with you, Marcus, on that point in terms of not leaving it until the round 7 and 8 to have to get through, because those 2 games in January, are going to fall. And I wish the other guys were here because they're much more forensic about the sort of fixture list and this kind of thing. But I know that January, for example, you've got the FA Cup, of course, you've got the Carabao as well. You're coming off the Christmas period. You don't want to have to field your strongest team in those 2 games. You can possibly avoid it. Now, I'm not expecting Spurs to be comfortably through at that point. We can't expect that, this year. It's not the Europa League, I don't think. They can't be aiming to be kind of sailing through and, they can play a couple of backup teams in those games. Of course not. But equally, I agree with you. I think they would be best, front loading in this competition and trying to get points on the board early, because I also agree. I think that there will be some teams, and particularly the bigger teams in PSG, I think you ring them correctly, who may start slowly again. We saw it last year that the fact there are 8 games means that kind of the traditional giants of the competition I think can slightly spread their bets a bit, and if they get to sort of round 5 or 6 and they need those 2 or 3 wins to get into the first 8, then they can really motor at that point, and maybe the best time is to try and catch them cold early on. My only feeling, I guess, and this is slightly more from the sort of fans' point of view, is, and of course there is always that excitement of being in the Champions League, and as I say, I think PSG is a great draw. I think Dortmund is always a brilliant tie. And let's not say we're getting bored of Bodø Glimt, because they're a fantastic story and a brilliant team. So there are some really romantic and brilliant ties in there. I guess just from a fan's point of view, you might say it's a little bit samey. They played Frankfurt recently, they played Bodø Glimt recently, played PSG obviously in the Super Cup final. It feels a little bit like, they played Dortmund a couple of times, I think, over the last, few years in Europa and also possibly Champions League. Apologies for not remembering which. I don't think it's the most kind of spectacular, glitzy glamour draw. It's not as if there's a Barcelona in there or a Real Madrid. It's not as if they've got sort of, 2 or 3 Italian, going a trip to Milan. I wonder if the trips basically probably would have been a bit more fun the other way around. Going to Prague, going to Copenhagen, going to Dortmund, going to little Villarreal on the Spanish coast. All would have been, nice trips, and maybe the sort of the other ones, PSG at home, Monaco at home, that would have been great for the fans. A big night under the lights at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But we're being choosy, right? It's great they're in the Champions League.
Yes,
they go in as the Europa League winners.
You're being choosy, Tom. I'm delighted with this draw.
As well. I think it commands a bit of respect going to champions. I think the other teams will be looking at them and saying, Spurs are a difficult team to beat.
Listen, Tom, champions of Europe, we know what we are, and we'll make absolutely sure that everybody who plays us knows what we are. I'm not being finicky at all. I think the bottom line with this expanded Champions League, and I like it in many ways, because you touched upon the group phase in the past. Yes, you could get a group of death, but you could also get some really boring groups where, with a couple of match days to go, everything was wrapped up. So I think this system is better, but I think, to be honest, the Champions League really gets going after the league phase. So, yeah, I agree with you. Let's get on the front foot, get as many points on the board as possible, as we did actually in the Europa League last season, try and take a little bit of the pressure off, and then potentially be able to be clever with team selection as we get a little further down the Premier League season, and hopefully towards the latter stages of the League Cup, and then, of course, the FA Cup as well. So, it's all looking good. The most important thing at the moment, though, Tom, is that transfer window, which is going to slam shut in a few days' time. And I said at the top of the show, I'm getting so bored. I'm not blaming anybody, any of the reporters who keep giving us these names, including good old Tom Barkley, who's not with us tonight, but he's been breaking a few stories and is right up to speed with what's going on, which is good. But equally, it's just so frustrating to hear now that Xavi Simons has come across and he's in talks with Spurs, but he appears to be waiting for Chelsea. I don't get that at all, because I thought one thing we learned from the whole Eze business, Tom, was that if a player really doesn't want to come and join us, we are not interested in them. So for that reason alone, I do not understand why we are showing any interest in Xavi, because it sounds like we'll only get him if Chelsea don't want him. That's not right, is it?
I think the thing is with this, and obviously Frank, it was a good line. I think after losing out on Eze, it was a very strong line. I thought it was very convincing. It was a good way to sort of bring a bit of unity and to get fans back on side. I have to say I don't really buy it. I don't really think it doesn't work like that in the transfer window. There are always players who would prefer to go somewhere else, and if fans think otherwise, then they're kidding themselves. And that's the same at any club. That's not just Tottenham, If Brian and Mbeumo hadn't been, if Man United hadn't made the right offer, then he probably, maybe he would have joined Tottenham, and I think he would have been a great player for Spurs, and Spurs fans would have got behind it. But of course, he used to be a Man United fan, and you have to accept that. Eberechi Eze was very close to joining Tottenham, but his mum still keeps his Arsenal shirts from his academy days. Would everyone have been, devastated to have Eze playing for Spurs, even though he obviously was an Arsenal supporter as a boy? I don't think so. I think people understand to an extent that there is a certain reality here with players. They all have backgrounds, they all have choices and preferences, and I also think sometimes these things can be slightly overplayed. Players are human beings at the end of the day. They probably have preferences in their minds, but actually then they go and talk to managers. They go to training grounds. They talk to other players. and they can quickly have their heads turned, and they can say, okay, yeah, I originally thought that I wanted to go here because the money was better, or there was a better chance playing Champions League football. But then I had a phone conversation with the manager, and he told me he wants me to play in this position. He's got this idea for my future. He's going to play me regularly. That he thinks this area of my game he can work on, and he showed me these previous players that he's done that with. And suddenly everything changes. It's less about the kind of like the supporting element and the passion of who they want to play for. Ultimately, players are selfish. They want to improve themselves and to make the best choice for themselves and their career. And I think sometimes we kind of think of it maybe through a sort of journalistic or fans lens, where we think, oh, who do they support? Who do they really want to play for? I don't think it's really about that. And I think ultimately, if Xavi Simons thought he wanted to play for Chelsea and Spurs make him a really good offer and Thomas Frank sells him a good idea, we saw this with Ange many times, didn't we? That he managed to sell players good ideas, and they joined Spurs. Yeah. When, let's be honest, they weren't in a great position in the league. So yeah. I wouldn't overthink that.
I get that. I also, and I'm not close to these transfer dealings, so this is only a supposition from afar. But I almost get the impression that having been trumped by Arsenal over Eze, it almost seems as though Spurs now just want to trump Chelsea and get Simons. And I agree with you. You're not only going to have Spurs players playing for Spurs, and he's a very, very good young player. And the bottom line is we have got to get at least one, hopefully a couple of players in before the transfer window closes. Otherwise, this really bright start to the season, and we keep making this point, is in danger of fizzling out quite early. So yeah, I'm not going to complain. Of course, I'm not. But I just don't want it to look as though we're desperately just trying to get somebody for the wrong reasons. But his name obviously is...
to be honest, Marcus, I don't think that's a fair reflection. I don't think Spurs are going out to try and win some personality points by beating another London rival to a target. Xavi Simons has been on Tottenham's radar for a long time. He's been on a lot of top European clubs lists for a long time. Arsenal had him on their list this summer. Where on the list, who knows? But a lot of clubs in Tottenham's bracket have been looking at Xavi Simons for...
I get that, Tom, but what I'm also... Yeah, no, I take your point there, but what I'm just saying is that there's an increasing air of desperation, as there always is, when you've got 2 or 3 days to go, and some high-profile moves have not happened. I was watching a bit of the old, Amazon documentary a couple of days ago, and there was Daniel Levy again saying, "Oh, all the business is done the last few days of the window," and there's a factual truth to that. But I mean, it's just so wrong. It's so wrong. You've got to stop that culture. Here we are now, 3-4 days to go. Oh my God, are we going to get Simons? Conor Gallagher's name is being thrown up again. Atletico don't want to lose him. But Savinho sounds like it's not now going to happen. Ademola Lookman, fine player. But suddenly these names are coming out. There's just, all I'm saying is I think there's a danger that whoever does eventually come might look a little bit like a third or a fourth choice. And that immediately puts them under a little bit of pressure. I think deep down that goes back to the way this transfer business is conducted, not just by Tottenham, but to a large extent by Spurs, who specialise, if that's the right word, in last-minute signings, which is never clever anyway, because you've already played the first 3 bloody games of the season.
And we thought that with Champions League football, it wouldn't necessarily be necessary. They would have more advantages, both financially and also in terms of what they can offer players, that they might be able to kind of do the business, earlier in the window. I guess what Tottenham would contend towards that is that they tried. They would say that they have tried to get players over the line earlier in the window. They just haven't managed to. And we don't need to go over the Eze deal and the Gibbs-White deal. If they got either of those in the building, then, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. I still think Eze was late. When you think about what it was, post-tour, post-preseason training, post-first game of the season, whatever, bench mark you want to set. He missed, the 3 or 4 main ones that the best clubs and the best recruiters kind of like to get their players in by. So there's no denying Tottenham are late here, and I think they've been late all summer. When you go right back to the end of last season, not knowing what they were going to do about Ange, that took a couple of weeks, and that basically set them back right from the beginning. They were behind everyone else. They didn't know who the manager was until Frank came in, and then Frank comes in. He has to, talk to everyone. He has to bring in his staff. They have to reset the sort of the line of command. Everything has been, 2 or 3 weeks behind all the way through. And I think in recent years, Tottenham have done better in this regard, haven't they? It's probably not fair to kind of say that this has been consistently like this. It's not like it was 10, 15 years ago where it really was consistently like this. They have had a couple of windows recently.
Yeah, true. It's true. It's been a bit better. I mean, there was only one way to go, and that was up. So there's been a slight improvement. And I think what's really interesting, I mean, you shouldn't look too much at social media. We all do. And you have some people going, oh, this is the worst transfer window ever. The club has lost. And I think that's foolish, because Kudus and Polina are two fantastic signings. And there is still time. Of course, if we bring in 1-2 more, I think actually, as late as it may be, we will still perhaps reflect that they did do very, very good business in the end. And I would still concur that you're better doing good business late on than bad business early. But that doesn't hide the fact that I do think the next 3 or 4 days, Tom, are really significant. If we are going to challenge on all 4 stages, which is what Thomas Frank has said more than once he wants to do over more than 60 games.
Yeah. And I think, coming back to your point before about the sort of desperation point in the player feeling like maybe their 4th or 5th choice, I actually would flip that round and say it's not really about the player. Ultimately, I think the player coming in, it's not really like not like a manager where they come in and sometimes, you can say, well, listen, they tried to get X, Y, Z and they ended up with you. I think with players, that doesn't really count. It's more, in my opinion, the concern here is, are Spurs going for the players that they're convinced about, that they really think are going to actually fly? Or are they doing it because they feel like they have to, because they need to boost the squad at this late stage, or because they feel like they need to give the fans something, after missing out on key targets? Do they really believe Xavi Simons is the right man? And there's a lot to say why he would be, by the way. He came through at Barcelona, has been looked at by the top clubs for a long time. Has been fantastic at PSV, was fantastic at Leipzig. There was a reason why PSG, signed him from Barca. Even Barca didn't really want to let him go. They had to let him go when he was a kid because they couldn't afford to keep him. He can play, centrally. He can play out wide. Brilliant dribbler. Still very young. There's a lot to like about Xavi Simons. I'm not saying he's not the right guy. My concern, I think, would be that having missed out on your 2 or 3 targets that you really wanted at this late stage, are you spending that 60 million because you're really, really wanting this guy and he ticked all the boxes in the first place? Or were those boxes that you felt were unticked before and that's why you didn't go for them, a month or 2 ago? Are they still significant? And if they are, be careful, because ultimately if Spurs spend 60, 70 million this summer on a player who misses out and doesn't deliver, then that's going to set them back. We've seen that before, how it can set Tottenham back 2 or 3 years. It's not like Manchester City where they can do an expensive miss and recover pretty quickly and go and get another one. But Tottenham, they can't make those kind of mistakes. So that's what they have to be careful by. I agree these next 3 or 4 days are really crucial, but they can make it worse by making the wrong signings at this time as well.
No, that's a good point. And Thomas Frank has addressed that. And he said, look, I trust the board. They're working extremely hard. But he has also, I think, made it clear that there is no point buying the wrong player. And listen, for me, Thomas Frank certainly at the moment can do no wrong at all. So I have faith. I have the belief that somebody good, very, very good, is going to come in between now and the end of the window. And I'll say it again. I think we are on the cusp of a really exciting season, as long as we can keep the majority of our players fit, which of course is a major if. One player now, Tom, who looks as though he's going to be staying, and I'm getting Ndombele vibes already. It's a bit early to be saying that, but Yves Bissouma was all set to go to Turkey. It sounds as though that deal is off. The reason I heard was that they didn't think he was fit enough. God knows what he's been up to during the summer. Doesn't entirely surprise me. I thought they were also going to say he was late turning up for some sort of negotiation meetings. If he doesn't go, does he have a part to play this season at Tottenham?
I would instinctively say no, but equally I think Bissouma has proven before that he's got comeback kid vibes, hasn't he? I think I was ruling Bissouma out long term probably back in sort of February time. I sort of remember us doing a pod and me saying I thought that he was basically done under Ange and it looked like Ange had enough of him. I stand by that. I think Ange had enough of him. And I think all being equal, I think he would have liked to have played, 3 or 4 players ahead of Bissouma during the run-in and during the Europa League knockouts. But in the end, he basically had to play him because he didn't have any other bodies. And fair play to Bissouma because, he put all that aside and really delivered when Tottenham needed him. And in a way, fair play to And as well, by the way, for sort of, swallowing his pride on that and putting him in, albeit through desperation. Could Frank end up in a similar scenario? Absolutely. Let's not pretend it couldn't happen again. If Tottenham are in the Champions League and they've got this current squad and they get 2 or 3 injuries in central midfield, and we're talking about that January period where they're having to go to, Grimsby away in the FA Cup 3rd round, could Bissouma get a run out? Absolutely. And there's, I think it's very possible. I personally think it's still most likely that Bissouma will leave before the end of the window. I think even if Galatasaray don't think the deal is right for them, I think others will. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a great deal for Spurs, and I don't necessarily think it's going to be a permanent one. I think it could easily be a loan. But I would imagine there will still be enough suitors for Bissouma because, listen, it hasn't been good for Tottenham's hopes of selling Bissouma. What's happened in the last few weeks, that I completely stand behind what Frank did, and disciplinary issues early on in a manager's tenure are absolutely crucial to get right. But equally, I can imagine the selling department at Spurs probably slightly, cursing their luck that Bissouma was late and that Frank dropped him from the squad, because it wasn't a good look, and if interested clubs had any kind of reservations about Bissouma's kind of professionalism and standards, then that would have made them nervous, wouldn't it? So it hasn't been a great sort of, few weeks for the Bissouma sale kind of pitch. But, equally, if you had to sell Bissouma to let's say someone like West Ham, for example, who need midfielders with legs and energy, and, you could say, well, look, this is what he delivers at his best. And when he is at his best, Bissouma is a real asset. There's no doubt about that. And there are always managers, there are always clubs who back themselves to get the best out of slightly drifting players. And Bissouma is that. So I would be surprised if there aren't, still some clubs interested in him before the end of the window.
Yeah, and of course Spurs are being linked with Lucas Paqueta at West Ham, so I don't know whether there might be some sort of possible swap deal there. I think the one thing, you're absolutely right. And Frank, he had no choice. He did exactly the right thing to react as he did when Bissouma was late. I guess if he is still at the club, then Thomas, if he deep down also thinks that he can get the best out of a player like that, has the opportunity to say, okay, look, what happened. I've dealt with it. You're still here now. I will give you another chance. And I do get frustrated. I remember you actually sat down and interviewed him, it must have been well over a year ago. And he was saying all the right things there. And there are those times where he does look such a good player. I always find it so frustrating when, for whatever reason, a player cannot give his all, cannot take full advantage of the natural talent that he has to produce at such a high level. I mean, I don't think any of us can get that because we'd all, it's a cliche, but we'd all give our right leg, which wouldn't really help to be playing at Bissouma's level. But, maybe I'm just too much of a romantic, but I keep thinking, this time he's going to come back and he's going to do the business. And I know, we'll see. But yeah, I think deep down it would be better for everybody if he was to go.
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, just the one point there, I think, is, and this, we shouldn't say that Bissouma is unusual here. The hardest step to take in football, I think, is to get to the kind of top clubs and to deliver consistently, and that is, Bissouma's not alone because he's been late a few times, and because, we've seen him have a very up and down career at Spurs. He is, that guy, I guess, in the squad right now. But there are plenty of players who, show a lot of talent and form for the kind of middle range clubs in the Premier League. They go to the clubs in the top 5 or 6 and then find it difficult to deliver consistently, and that has been his thing. And he's not a youngster anymore. He's getting to sort of the latter half of his career now. And you're right. He needs to find somewhere where he's going to play regularly and be trusted.
Yeah. Okay. So those are a few of the names, and something else might emerge between now and I guess it's September. Is it September the 1st or whenever it is when that window comes crashing down? Before then, home game against Bournemouth. And whenever I look at Andoni Iraola, I think of you. You don't like that, but for those who are watching on YouTube, please back me up. I think there's a real similarity between Allnutt and Iraola, and he's done
I
all.
bet Iraola doesn't conduct his Zoom meetings with floral wallpaper in the background.
I don't know. I mean, we'll have to
Maybe he
ask
does.
him
Yeah.
if we get an opportunity. Of course, he was one of those being linked with the Spurs job towards the end of last season. He's done a fantastic job, obviously, at Bournemouth. This will be an interesting season for him. They've had some players come, they've had some players go. They were good at Liverpool. Obviously, they lost 4-2. I mentioned the 1-0 win against Wolves. Disappointing home defeat to Brentford in the League Cup at the start of this week. They've had some good results against us of late as well. I was looking back last season. They got the draw at Tottenham. They beat us. That was one of those miserable nights when they won 1-0. And Ange had one of his tete-a-tetes with, well, more than lots of tete-a-tetes with some of the supporters, the away supporters. So some up and down results, and they're a decent team. I'm expecting Spurs to win. I'm fascinated. What's Thomas's tactical plan going to be on Saturday? I'm assuming he'll play quite a positive attacking lineup, particularly with this being the last game before the international break.
I think so. I think Spurs are probably catching Bournemouth at a good time, actually. I said that about the City game as well. I don't know if that counts as a correct prediction, but
actually, do you know what though, Tom? I've been noting, particularly last season, and it was Bournemouth away. I remember you said exactly the same thing. This is a good. I don't know. Bournemouth had a bit of a dip. You said this is a good time to go to Bournemouth. I fully expect us to win that game. It's stuck in my mind for some reason. So be careful what you say when predicting this one, please.
This is the problem when you podcast regularly with someone. They start to realise you just say the same thing in every prediction. It's a good time to play Bournemouth because I think they basically sold a lot of their best players, and they've got a whole new back line. Excuse me. And they'll almost certainly, find the gems that they always do to replace them. But as it stands, they're still finding that cohesion in the team again. And I think we've seen that, so far in their first 3 games. They were pretty good away at Liverpool, to be honest, in that first game, but they were still, I felt, much more open at the back than I think Iraola would have liked. They got a sort of scratchy 1-0 win over Wolves at home, and then, as you say, they lost at home to Brentford in midweek in the Carabao Cup. So I think more than anything, Spurs should be looking at themselves, and they've had obviously a fantastic start, and they'll go into this game at home against Bournemouth full of confidence. I think they'll see this as one of those games where they should play an attacking team, look to dominate the ball. If we're looking at the kind of Frank, blueprint here, which Frank do we see? I think we see the attacking Frank that wants to kind of take this game to Bournemouth, from the start. I think he'll play a 4 and he'll play a 2 and then he'll play an attacking midfielder and then a front 3. And I guess one of the selection decisions for me will be the Richarlison-Solanke decision, whether or not he sticks with Richarlison, who I think played well again against City.
I think he has to, doesn't he?
But I wonder if he starts to think, he has mentioned a couple of times, Richarlison, how they have to be careful with him in terms of his load and his injury management. He said a few times that the problems he's had in the past, where we have to look at that and really manage it and make sure it doesn't happen again. And I wonder, obviously, Solanke go on.
I was going to say, I'd understand that if we were playing 2 games a week, but this relatively innocuous start of 1 game a week, I would think what scares me is when they go off for an international break, and obviously he's back in the Brazil squad, and we're going to have to cross everything that something doesn't go wrong there. But I saw one stat where he's got the best marks out of any player in the Premier League so far this season. So I think just for his confidence as much as anything else, and to keep. Obviously, Solanke would love to play against his former team, and I think he'd come off the bench and be very dangerous. But I just think for his morale and for everything else, I certainly hope that Richarlison starts on Saturday.
Do you? That's interesting, isn't it? I don't know how many times you would have said that last season.
Not many.
You would have said, I hope Richarlison starts at home. Sorry, go on. I thought you were interrupting me there.
Well, no, sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting. I was going to say, no, I didn't say it many times, but I just think when he's a confidence player as well. And actually, the game last weekend at Manchester City, I was getting a little frustrated with him. The first 20-25 minutes, he wasn't holding the ball up as well as he did, notably against PSG in the Super Cup. Then, of course, he played so well, scored those 2 great goals first game of the season against Burnley. But as the match developed, I thought he was a real handful again. And, that confidence was still there. So I just think that Spurs have got to take full advantage of that, because you don't know what's going to happen to him from a physical point of view. So while he's fit, while he's confident, get the maximum out of him for 65 minutes or whatever, and then Solanke can come on. And I thought he looked sharp at City, very nearly scored, and against maybe a flagging new-look Bournemouth defence, Solanke for the last 25 minutes would be the perfect option as well.
Yeah, I mean, and what I meant was it's interesting that, I'm not sure how many times we would have said that we almost prefer to have Richarlison in the team at the weekend over Solanke. And I think that, it really speaks volumes about how well he has started under Frank. I think it's a decision to make. Maybe Frank might wonder about his load if he, as you mentioned, with the international break coming up. That's not a break for Richarlison. That's more games, that's more travel. He might just wonder if it's not. I'm not dropping you. I'm rotating you to make sure you're fit and that you're staying fit and injury free this season for us, so you can be a genuine option long term, because that's how much we value you. I can imagine him framing it like that. But either way, it's a good option to have, and Spurs at the moment have two, good strikers that they can field in that game. And otherwise, I think it's going to be an attacking lineup, and I think, I compare this to last season when Spurs were playing at home to Bournemouth, and in that game where I thought they basically got played off the pitch, to be honest. And it was it was draw. It was 2-2, wasn't it?
It was.
And but it wasn't a 2-2 match. What in the stadium, it looked like Bournemouth could have scored about 6 or 7 times on the break, and it was one of those matches where Spurs just got carved open again and again. There was no confidence, I don't think, from the fans, that this was a game they were going to win or deserve to win. What a difference, and what a difference now, we're talking in late August under the new manager with, let's be honest, a fairly similar squad. But, it feels completely different. I believe Tottenham could get a clean sheet, this weekend, another one, on the back of 2 clean sheets already. Again, that's a big sea change, and it's still early days, very early days. And Tom Barkley was right to point out the other day, of course, that Spurs made a fantastic start under Ange Postecoglou 2 years ago. But it's a game I think they can go into with confidence. And also, I think they've got a good run coming up. This so often happens when you win a tough game, like you go away to City and you win 2-0. Suddenly the fixture list sort of opens up for you a little bit. When you're in a bad run of form, you look at every match and you think, we've got to go away to Wolves or something. And, every game looks awkward. But when you're winning and you're getting clean sheets and you think you can, score goals from anywhere on the pitch because, you're practicing your set pieces and you can grind out results as well as win games easily, suddenly every game looks winnable, and you look at the next games that are coming up for Spurs: Bournemouth home, West Ham away, Brighton away, Wolves home, Leeds away, Villa at home, Everton away. I mean, these are all winnable matches for a team that's in form and playing well. If they can get some confidence, momentum going, then these are all games that Spurs should feel like they can get good points, good performances from, and they can get a really good start under Frank and get some momentum going.
Yeah, I mean, it could almost be an identical situation to 2 years ago, where, of course, first 10 games under Ange, we were flying, we were top of the league. There is definitely a chance, based on those fixtures, that we could be top of the league then. But I'm not going to take anything for granted. Actually, just on the subject before we go of Big Ange, who had his 60th birthday earlier in the week. Happy birthday to him. And his name's being linked with a number of jobs. I mean, it's guesswork, of course, but you look at Graham Potter really struggling at West Ham. He's already been linked with Nottingham Forest. Back in the summer, everyone was going, well, it's only a matter of time before Daniel Farke goes, and he'd be a good fit at Leeds. I assume he wouldn't go to Rangers after what he did for Celtic, but I think they're going to need a new manager sooner rather than later. Have you got a gut feeling as to where Postecoglou might pop up next?
I think the Forest one is interesting, I have to say. I can see the appeal there for Postecoglou. If you think it's sort of his ballpark in terms of kind of romance and history and, the European Cup, and it's sort of his period as well when he was kind of, really getting into the Premier League, and Forest were doing fantastically in that time with Clough, and I just think I could see it. Equally, if you think about how Forest have been really moulded under Nuno, what kind of team they've been under him, it would be quite a big step to go from that to Ange football. It's not like they're a sort of free-flowing team at the moment. They're organised and, like to play low block. And so that would be a big change. But I could see it in terms of the sort of brand of Forest and the brand of Ange. I could kind of see that match-up. And I don't know, Marinakis and Postecoglou, I don't know.
I mean, that to me straight away, it spells trouble. I mean, he obviously seemed to get on pretty well with Daniel Levy, but Marinakis is an altogether different proposition. I mean, could you see him at West Ham? That vacancy's coming soon, unless Potter can do something. I mean, I don't know whether there's,
Do you think the West Ham fans would go for that?
Well,
for an ex-Spurs manager who just won in the Europa League?
He plays the sort of football they like. I mean, they hounded Moyes out, didn't they, primarily because the football was boring, even though they won a European trophy under him. So I could see the fit there. In footballing terms, that makes more sense perhaps than Nottingham Forest. I don't know, again. I mean, listen, we've become accustomed to having ex-Chelsea managers, so I don't see why West Ham couldn't put up with having an ex-Spurs manager. It would be an interesting dynamic. It would certainly add plenty of spice. Well, of course, we're playing them soon. It probably won't happen, but there's no love lost between Spurs and West Ham anyway. If Postecoglou rocks up in West Ham colours, little like Poch did for Chelsea a year or two ago, it would add spice to the fixture, wouldn't it? But I don't know. It'll be interesting. I hope he gets back in. Listen, for all we said, and honestly, I'm not going to ever mention it again, but I like to feel totally justified by the way Thomas Frank has started, that it was the right thing for the board to do. It was the right thing for Ange to go when he did. He went a hero. He's got a great chance now to go and do whatever he wants. So I think the whole thing has worked out perfectly, and I think we all wish him lots of. I
think it's early days, Marcus. I think it's right to. I mean, you know, the Ange debate we've had, but I don't think we can say after 2 games that Frank has yet, you know, has demonstrated that point. But I like your optimism.
He has, mate. He's a genius. And I remember calling Postecoglou a genius this time 2 years ago. So, you know, I can say the wrong things. You're right. It's 2 games. It's madness. And it's not like me to be so buoyant. I tell you something else as well. Looking back at that Man City game last week, and it was brilliant. But we did have some good fortune at key moments early on, in particular when down the left, Savinho, down the City left, Savinho was sort of causing Pedro Porro an awful lot of trouble. Haaland invariably is never as sharp against us as he is against some other teams. He had a couple of moments. I mean, had City scored first, that might have been a very different game. So it's early days, but it's just the structure, the way we are translating defence into attack when we have to. The fact that we are taking set pieces serious, and I'm sorry, but that was a major negative to the Postecoglou era. I'm not too bothered about set pieces. I'm sorry, but in this modern era, they are absolutely crucial. And I've just seen things already, Tom, and yeah, I might be proved wrong, but I really think, and I just the energy that Thomas Frank is bringing, 10 out of 10. 9 out of 10, because obviously we didn't win the Super Cup, but that wasn't. Well, yeah, a couple of subs, perhaps not perfect. No, 8.5 out of 10. No, 9 out of 10.
I think we'll probably do a pod maybe maybe before the international or during the international break where we can kind of assess the start slightly more fully. But I kind of agree with you. If we look at the kind of, it's the contrast, isn't it? Which is so striking. I think there are so many aspects of Frank's management style that are so obviously different to Ange. You know, it's impossible. It's impossible to miss them. You know, and that's just from the things like how he acts on the line, his demeanour. You know, during matches. You know, he's so energetic with his tactics board out, and he's pulling coaches off the dugout. You know, to go and give instructions, and he's getting team huddles together, and that dynamism, I think, on the line. You know, is such an obvious stark contrast to the way Ange was. And I just think, more broadly, Spurs are a clever team, at the moment. They look to me like a clever team, a serious one, a solid one, but sort of one that knows their jobs, that can react in games and change and twist and turn according to what's happening. They're smart. Whereas I think, we all know that the Ange team was fun to watch, a lot of the time, but it was naive, and I think Spurs are, in my opinion, it's surprising how quickly they have made that shift from being a sort of a very naive team to being what I see now as being a very smart one. And I think Frank is being generous as well in the sense that he's saying, there's a lot of a togetherness and a cohesion there that he's building on, that when he arrived, he was really pleasantly surprised to see how much spirit there was already in the camp. I think, part of that is him being gracious towards, Ange and his legacy. I also think it's probably true, on the back of a Europa League win, I think it would be, it's natural that a squad is together like that. And also after what they went through in the last few weeks of last season. So, he has some advantages there, of course. And I think that the main question marks about Frank are still to come, Can he get enough goals out of this team? Can he get enough excitement out of the team against the lower block sides in the lower half of the division? Does he give enough to the cups? Does he have enough, to be honest, does he have enough ammunition to give enough to the cups, in the squad? And is that going to really, bring the season down if Spurs don't go deep in some of these competitions when the fans have had a taste of winning trophies. There are still lots of question marks, I think, about the season. But you're right. Early on, first impressions.
Yes.
What did you say? 8.5 out of 10?
Well, 9. I kept oscillating about the half point.
I think I'd go with 9.
I'm giving him 9.
I'd go with 9.
And I need to correct myself, although it wasn't Savinho. Of course, I've got Savinho on the brain because I wanted to come to Spurs, who was causing trouble for Porro. It was Marmouche, wasn't it, early on in that game last weekend when he looked really good.
It was.
But
you're right, yeah.
Well, okay, Mr. A. I think that has covered most things. We could easily get sort of outdated very quickly. We'll wake up tomorrow morning and our own Tom Barkley perhaps sort of broken the news that Lookman and Savinho and Gallagher and Simons have all joined for a collective fee of £400 million.
He'll tell all his Twitter followers first, he's a little snake like that.
Exactly, yeah. Who's paying him more? But we will all reconvene next week. Enjoy the game on Saturday. And of course, now please get in touch. I sent out a little list on our X page, and it's something, again, during the international break, maybe we can reflect on the best managers. Where do you put Ange in the best ever Spurs manager? And when I say best ever, that's difficult as well, depending on how long you've been supporting the club for. I was severely chastised by one listener for not mentioning Arthur Rowe. Now, listen, I've been around for quite a long time, and I know exactly what Arthur Rowe did do in terms of his wonderful push and run and everything else, but I didn't see him. Actually, I mean, I was around, vaguely aware of what Bill Nicholson was doing, but I even don't really know what he did. But you know what I'm trying to say? I'd love to we want to get a list, a definitive list of the best ever Spurs managers, and where does Ange fit in? I had Thomas Frank already in 10th place after 2 games. I think I have been.
He's already there.
I've been taking too many happy tablets, but that's just one thing. That certainly do get in touch with your questions. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Basically, it's interactive. We'd love to hear from you. Tom, I mean, you're driving this. Yes, go on. Give us the details.
The Tottenham Way pod at gmail.com is the email. So get in touch with us. Yeah, any comments or suggestions, likes or dislikes. Tell us who you really don't want to hear from on the pod. More than anyone else.
Well, no, that gets me worried.
And yes, and please do subscribe on YouTube as well. That'd be great.
And do you think Tom looks a little bit like Andoni Iraola? I've never seen the two of them in the same room. You'll be at the same stadium. Are you there Saturday?
I'm not. I'm off. I'm still off this week until the weekend.
How can you be a top football journalist and be off when the season has started? I'm going to be contacting your manager straight away. It's shocking.
The season never ends these days, Marcus. If anything, the start of the season is the most low jeopardy moment of the year. Otherwise, it's full on.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, we'll be back next week. I'll be there on Saturday. Hope to see some of you. Enjoy it. And come on, you Spurs.